Hello everybody, my name is Daulton Nelson and today I'd like to give my thoughts on the game I just beat, that game being Detention for the PS4. Detention was developed by a Taiwanese independent developer named Red Candle Games. Detention was also partially self-published by Red Candle Games, as well as partially published by independent publisher Coconut Island Games. Detention is a 2D side-scrolling adventure game. I found out about Detention last year while watching a Scary Game Squad video on YouTube as they played it live during a live event. I was drawn to the game for its horrific and different art style that it sported, so I had bought Detention on sale based off of its looks alone. One thing I was not expecting going into the game was to get an interesting history lesson on Taiwan and its culture. Detention takes place during a time in Taiwan known as the White Terror, which is one of the largest periods of martial law a country has ever seen. During this time in Taiwan's history, many people were killed or had disappeared or were imprisoned by the governing body at the time, known as the KMT. Those that were targeted by the government were suspected of being dissidents of the current ruling party, and this suspicion could come from a sliver of doubt from anybody, and all peoples would be arrested just based off of a form, from what it seems, that you could just fill out and turn into the government, or even just a first-hand account of something that you might have seen a neighbor do. It really sounds like a horrific time within Taiwan's history, and I will not do it justice as I am not an expert. So I very much encourage you to check out this point in Taiwan's history yourself. I've included 2 links in the description below that are very interesting reads on the subject. Despite this very engaging dive into Taiwan's culture and history, Detention, the game itself, didn't end up being so engaging. But first, I would like to go into elements that I liked about the game. For one, the art style in this game is absolutely beautiful. Backgrounds, characters, even trees look like they were hand-drawn and kind of almost look like pieces of paper that are being animated before your eyes. A lot of the movement looks unnatural, and that's very much a good thing here in Detention, as it makes all of the movement pop out and scary. Red Candle Games did a fantastic job, especially with framing within this game. Whenever I would enter into a new scene, every time that opening shot lit up on my TV screen, I couldn't help but say, wow, they really know how to build backgrounds and settings and really make things pop out, especially the color red within this game. Most of the colors within the game are blue and desaturated, however the red in this game is very vivid and pops out. It's very horrifying whenever you see it. It is almost as if it has a glow or an emission to it. I also like the soundtrack / score within this game. It swells up very much and really sets the mood for some of these set pieces that you run into. Finally, I would like to commend the story within Detention. At its base, Detention could probably be seen as a character-driven story, following this protagonist named Fang, and how she reacts to what's happening around her throughout the entire game. But the game is also very much about Taiwan's White Terror period, however, not outwardly. There would be things you would run into throughout the game that would be very symbolic of what either the developers felt throughout that period, or possibly what people they've known and how their experiences throughout this period influenced this game. It's all very smart. Now for the rest of this review, I'm going to break down the criticism into each chapter of the game, because I felt that in the beginning of the game, Detention showed great quality. However, as it progressed, it kept falling off more and more for me. So starting off with Chapter 1, these are some fantastic opening moments for the game. This is also the most mechanically dense the game gets. After a very engaging introduction, you, playing as Fang, must go around your school finding different items and then using those items in puzzle-like fashion in order to progress through the game. You are given a goal early on in the chapter and then have to progress through that goal for the entire chapter. This made progression feel very clear. I also loved some of the very distressing set pieces that Red Candle Games put within this first chapter. I don't want to spoil them for you, but these are very disturbing or very horrifying, and I really love that. Red Candle Games is at their best when they're making you confront the unnatural, or the very still, letting the horror seep in without having it fester through jump scares. Now, as the player gets into Chapter 2, the cleverness of the puzzles wind down a little bit, as well as the amount of enemies you will encounter throughout this Chapter 2. The puzzles are much more simple and straightforward this time around, and the game feels so much more easier by having a save point right in the beginning hallway that you can always go back to and save at, without having any real risk being put onto you. The third chapter of the game is when Detention really starts to dip in quality for me, as there's barely anything in it that really grabs a hold of me and makes me remember the game as much. The puzzles in this chapter really just wind down to two kind of clever puzzles, being a clock puzzle and a puzzle with some doors. Other than that, everything else is very straightforward. This is also the point in the game where Detention stops being horrifying. There are still a couple of distressing moments here and there, but for the most part, you're going to feel really stagnant about what's going on in this chapter. Then there is Chapter 4, which I am very disappointed in. Once you get to this point within the game, Detention just feels like it's on autopilot. There are no puzzles really to speak of, nor is there any enemies. Mechanics that were introduced within Chapter 1 are totally gotten rid of within Chapter 4. There are no scares to think of, nor is there really any time to take a breath, as there is constant narrative being forced upon you. Also, finishing Detention at this point feels like it might as well have just been handed to you, as there's no real risk, no real enemy, there's nothing really stopping you, there's no puzzles at all. It just feels like you're going through the motions that the game wants you to go through. In conclusion, I feel like Detention has its own unique place within horror video games, as well as Red Candle Games has their own unique narrative and culture that they can bring into the video games industry, and I'd very much like to see that. However, Detention is not an example of that. While it has a great opening first chapter, each chapter subsequently drops in quality until it is basically a movie that you are just playing with your fingers. That's why I'm going to give Detention a final score of a 5 out of 10. I'd just like to reiterate that the style and the narrative that Red Candle Games bring forth is very compelling. However, that is not what is wrong here. What is wrong here is it feels like they've given up halfway through development, or at least halfway throughout their game, and made one part of Detention feel like a game and the other part just feel like a movie. And that's where my main problems lay. I hope Red Candle Games' next game, Devotion, brings more mechanical consistency and more difficulty throughout the game rather than this very easy, brisk, and quick experience. That concludes my review of Detention. If you like my reviews, you can like, comment, or subscribe. I also provide social media links down in the description below, as well as a link to my online Portfolum, where you can see game design works that I've done. And with that out of the way, please make sure to have a nice day. And please, make sure to check out those links down in the description below.